When Will Smith and Sandra Bullock walk onto the stage of the Victoria Lang show, the audience anticipates a heartwarming reunion, two beloved Hollywood icons reminiscing about their illustrious careers. But Victoria Lang isn't here for nostalgia. She craves drama, confrontation, and the kind of raw truth that makes headlines. As the lights dim and the applause fades, Will and Sandra settle into their seats, their smiles masking the storm that's about to unfold. Victoria clutches her cue cards, her eyes gleaming with more than just journalistic curiosity. This won't be a cozy chat. What begins as a typical Hollywood interview will soon spiral into a clash of words, emotions, and unfiltered honesty. Yet as Victoria prepares to push them into uncomfortable territory, she's unaware that she's the one who might lose control. Before the night ends, Will and Sandra will reveal something that will leave the audience stunned, forever etching this moment in their minds. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love stories like this, subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow, we've got another gripping tale waiting for you. The studio buzzed with energy. Strategic lighting bathed the set in warm hues, amplifying the electric atmosphere. The audience, a mix of devoted fans and curious onlookers, hummed with anticipation. Some held signs, others stared at the grand red curtain shielding the stage. The air carried the excited chatter of the crowd, layered with the soft rustle of the production team moving like clockwork backstage. At the center of the stage stood a sleek, black leather armchair, Victoria's throne. Flanking it were two modern chairs, poised for the evening's guests, Will Smith and Sandra Bullock. A massive screen behind them blazed the show's title in bold, vibrant letters. Every detail, colors, lights, sound was meticulously crafted, a symphony setting the stage for the drama about to erupt. Backstage, Will and Sandra shared a moment before their entrance. Their quiet exchange carried the ease of longtime friends, an unspoken bond forged through years in the spotlight. Will, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit with a crisp white shirt, exuded his signature charisma, a blend of charm and grounded confidence. Sandra, in an elegant emerald green dress that accentuated her expressive eyes, flashed a warm smile, though a faint tension lingered in her posture. "It's gonna be smooth, right?" Sandra murmured, smoothing her dress. Will tilted his head, a playful glint in his eyes. "You tell me," he replied softly, his voice carrying a hint of mischief. They both knew this wouldn't be a standard interview. Victoria Lang was infamous for her ruthless style, reveling in uncomfortable questions and dismantling her guests with surgical precision. Across the stage, Victoria gripped her cue cards tightly, her piercing gaze fixed ahead. Dressed in a tailored crimson suit, she radiated authority and confidence. A seasoned journalist, Victoria was both polarizing and fearless, a master at pushing guests to their breaking points. Her show thrived on revelations, tension, and raw moments, not comfort. As the show's theme music swelled, the audience erupted in applause. The game was on. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." Victoria spread her arms wide, her smile effortlessly disarming. "Tonight we're in for something extraordinary. Two Hollywood legends, reunited for what will be an unforgettable conversation." The crowd roared, some waving signs reading "Fresh Prince Forever" or "Sandra, you're our star." The excitement was palpable. Without further ado, please welcome Will Smith and Sandra Bullock. The red curtain parted, and Will and Sandra stepped into the spotlight, waving and smiling. Will's grin was infectious, his wave broad and welcoming. Sandra, radiant as ever, blew kisses to the crowd. The studio vibrated with cheers as they took their seats, still beaming. Victoria observed them closely, noting every detail. Will's relaxed posture, Sandra's subtle hair tuck. Small gestures, but to Victoria, they were ammunition. As the applause faded, an expectant hush fell over the room. Victoria held her cue cards, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. She glanced at her guests, her eyes sharp like a hunter sizing up her prey. "Welcome to the show," she said, her voice smooth but laced with an edge, each word deliberate. "Thanks for having us." "Victoria," Sandra replied, crossing her legs with effortless grace. "Great to be here," Will added, his tone warm and easy. Victoria tilted her head, her smile unwavering. "It's truly special to see you two together again. After decades of triumphs, challenges, and, well, a few controversies." She let the word controversies hang in the air, her pause deliberate. The audience stirred, a mix of nervous laughter and intrigued whispers rippling through the crowd. They sensed the shift. Sandra and Will exchanged a fleeting glance. Barely noticeable, but Victoria caught it. But before we dive into all that, she continued, flipping through her cue cards with casual precision, let's start with something simple. Her eyes locked onto them, glinting with intent. What does it mean to be Will Smith and Sandra Bullock today? Will leaned forward, his smile easy but his eyes sharp, sensing the question's layered intent. Sandra took a deep breath, preparing to answer. But Victoria's grip on her cue cards tightened, her gaze unwavering. The audience, still oblivious to the brewing tension, cheered eagerly. The question lingered. What does it mean to be Will Smith and Sandra Bullock today? Sandra spoke first, her voice steady. It's about staying true to who you are even as the world changes around you. Will nodded, adding, and it's about growth, learning from every step, every choice, and still keeping that spark you started with. The audience clapped, appreciating the sincerity. But Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. She flipped a cue card theatrically, letting the silence stretch. Interesting, she said, her tone almost too casual. Then the first jab. But did you really control your careers? She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with mischief. Or were you just Hollywood's puppets taking whatever roles they handed you? The studio went silent. The question wasn't just bold, it was an attack. Sandra's smile faltered for a split second before she recovered. Will, unfazed, tilted his head, studying Victoria like a chess opponent. She pressed on, zeroing in on Will. Take you, for example. You were the king of 90s blockbusters. Then you had Quieter, years before Men in Black, and Pursuit of Happiness brought you back. Was that your choice or just luck? What happened in those gaps? Will didn't rush his answer, his calm demeanor a shield. Life's not a straight line, he said evenly. Some choices you make, some opportunities find you. You decide what to do with them. Victoria wasn't satisfied. So you took roles you didn't want? Sandra let out a soft laugh, but it carried a cautious edge. Every actor does that sometimes, she said. The perfect role isn't always there, but every project shapes you. Victoria's eyes narrowed. So, Sandra, you've done roles you hated? The audience murmured, the question's sharpness cutting through the air. Sandra kept her smile, but her gaze hardened slightly. Hate's a strong word. I've taken roles I might not choose now, but they all led me here. It's the journey. Victoria leaned closer, undeterred. That sounds polished. The silence deepened. Will shifted, his posture still relaxed but his energy subtly charged. What kind of answer are you fishing for, Victoria? He asked, his tone light but pointed. The host blinked, caught off guard by the direct challenge. She recovered quickly, flashing a smile. Just a bit more honesty, Will. He smiled back, but his eyes held steady. Honesty doesn't need to be loud to be real. The audience murmured, sensing the shift. Will had flipped the script. If only for a moment, Victoria, never one to back down, pulled a new card. Her expression sharpened. All right, let's get real then. She turned to Sandra, her eyes glinting with renewed focus. Many say you could have been the greatest actress of your generation, but you played it safe with romantic comedies and crowd pleasers. Do you regret not taking bigger risks? The question was a dagger, questioning Sandra's talent and ambition. Sandra blinked, her composure tested. Will glanced at her, his support subtle but clear. The audience held its breath, waiting for her response. This was the moment where the interview could break or ignite. Sandra Bullock took a deep breath, allowing the tension to linger in the air for a fleeting moment, her composure unwavering as she collected her thoughts. That's interesting, she said, her voice steady and resolute, because I never saw my career that way. Victoria Lang raised an eyebrow, her expression tinged with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. You didn't? Sandra's smile returned, this time infused with a quiet confidence that seemed to radiate through the room, captivating the audience. People often assume taking risks means diving headfirst into dark, gritty roles that push boundaries. But I chose to craft movies that brought joy to millions of viewers worldwide. Isn't that a risk? Creating something pure and heartfelt, free from cynicism or despair. You might think that's safe, but I believe it's one of the boldest, most courageous choices an artist can make in today's world. The audience erupted into applause, a resounding wave of admiration, washing over the studio for her graceful yet profoundly powerful response. Victoria, however, remained unfazed, her demeanor as steely as ever. She plucked another card from her meticulously arranged stack, her expression shifting subtly as she turned, her piercing gaze toward Will Smith. And you, Will? She said, her voice dropping to a lower, more intimate register, hinting at something deeply personal she intended to unearth. Have you ever regretted a role you took, or perhaps one you turned down? A decision that might have altered your path? Sandra instinctively glanced at Will, her eyes reflecting a subtle concern as she sensed the weight of the question pressing down on him. Will didn't rush to respond, his silence deliberate. There was an unmistakable edge in Victoria's tone that suggested she was fishing for more than a casual, surface-level answer, something that could stir the depths of his experience. He exhaled slowly, the sound almost imperceptible, before speaking. "Every choice I've made has brought me to this very moment, to this place in my life," he said, his words simple yet laden with a profound, almost tangible meaning. The air in the studio grew thick with anticipation. Victoria locked eyes with him, holding his gaze with an intensity that seemed to challenge his resolve. "Even the choices that cost you something important?" she pressed, her voice softening but retaining its pointed edge. The audience fell silent, the question cutting through the studio like a finely honed blade, sharp and unrelenting. Sandra's brows furrowed slightly. She could sense Victoria was treading into dangerously personal territory, a space where few dared to venture. Will, however, remained composed, his deep, thoughtful eyes meeting Victoria's with a calm that belied the storm brewing beneath the surface. The silence stretched on, the entire room hanging on the edge of their seats, waiting for his response. "Even the choices that cost you something important?" Victoria repeated, her voice now a whisper laced with intent. The audience held their collective breath, the weight of the moment palpable. This wasn't just a provocative jab. It felt deeply personal, a deliberate strike at the core of Will's being. Willsmith stayed perfectly still, his gaze steady on Victoria Lang, while Sandra shifted in her seat. Tension etched into every line of her posture. She sensed the trap, and Victoria clearly knew exactly what she was orchestrating. Will took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling with purpose. "Life's not just about career moves, Victoria," he said, his voice calm yet carrying a quiet intensity that commanded attention. "Sometimes the choices we make, or the ones life thrusts upon us, shape who we are in ways we can't always predict. Regret doesn't erase that reality." Victoria tilted her head, feigning a moment of reflection as if weighing his words with genuine consideration. "So you've never had regrets?" she inquired, her tone probing. Will paused, his jaw tightening just enough to hint at the emotional weight her question carried. "I'd only regret living in fear of what might have been, letting that fear dictate my choices," he replied, his voice steady and resolute. The audience, which had been frozen in a hushed silence, burst into spontaneous applause, the sound reverberating through the studio as they recognized the depth of his response. But Victoria wasn't ready to relent or concede the upper hand. She picked up another card from her stack, her demeanor shifting once more, her eyes narrowing with renewed focus. "Will, your life has been lived under the relentless glare of the spotlight, filled with triumphs, significant challenges, and defining moments that have shaped your public image. Yet you always seem so unshakable, a pillar of strength. The public perceives you as this larger-than-life figure, always smiling, always inspiring. Is that authentic, or is it a carefully constructed mask you wear for the world?" Sandra immediately recognized the ploy. Victoria was attempting to crack Will's polished exterior, to peel back the layers and force a moment of vulnerability that would play out dramatically for the cameras. Will leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped together on the table in front of him, a gesture of control. "Pain is an inescapable part of the human experience," he said, his voice steady but raw with honesty. "I'm no different from anyone else sitting out there. I've faced losses, navigated struggles, and encountered moments when I didn't know how to move forward. What matters isn't the pain itself, it's what you choose to do with it, how you transform it." The sincerity in his words caught even Victoria off guard. Her pause brief but noticeable as she processed his response. She pivoted abruptly to Sandra, her tone sharpening like a blade. "And you, Sandra," she said, her voice cutting through the air with precision. "You've starred in countless love stories that have captivated audiences, but in your real life you've never found someone to stand by your side permanently. Why is that?" The audience murmured, the cruelty of the question impossible to overlook, a collective discomfort rippling through the crowd. Will glanced at Sandra, his eyes offering silent support and encouragement. Sandra blinked, then let out a soft laugh, low, deliberate, and infused with an emotion Victoria hadn't anticipated, a resilience that caught the host off guard. "You know, Victoria," she began, her voice soft yet unyielding, carrying a strength that filled the space. "Some questions reveal more about the person asking them than the one being asked." Victoria blinked, clearly caught off balance by the unexpected turn. Sandra continued, her gaze unwavering and resolute. "I did find someone," she declared, her words dropping into the studio like a stone into still water. The room fell into absolute silence, a rare moment where even the rustle of papers ceased. Sandra rarely spoke about her private life, making this revelation all the more impactful. "Someone who loved me for who I truly am, who made me laugh until my sides hurt, who gave me a family to cherish. His name was Brian Randall. He was my home, my sanctuary. And just because he's no longer here physically doesn't mean the love we shared has vanished or faded away." The tension in the room was palpable, a thick fog of emotion settling over the audience and participants alike. Victoria realized her misstep too late, the realization dawning on her face as she struggled to regain her footing. The audience remained still, absorbing the raw honesty of Sandra's words with a mixture of awe and empathy. Will reached over, placing his hand gently on hers, a quiet, powerful gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes without a single word. Sandra took a deep breath, her composure returning as she steadied herself. "Does that answer your question?" she asked, her tone firm yet graceful. The audience erupted into applause, the sound thunderous and overwhelming, a testament to the impact of her response. Victoria, for the first time, looked genuinely rattled, her confidence shaken. She glanced down at her cue cards, realizing with a sinking feeling that she had lost control of the interview. Will and Sandra weren't merely defending themselves. They were rewriting the narrative, turning the tables with every word. Victoria swallowed hard, her throat tight, and picked up her final card. If she had any chance left to regain the upper hand and steer the conversation back to her advantage, it was now. She lifted her eyes to Will, her smile completely gone, replaced by a steely determination. "Will, there's something you've never shared with the public, something that could fundamentally change how everyone in this room and beyond sees you. Are you ready to reveal the truth?" The studio froze, the air growing heavy with anticipation. Sandra shifted in her chair, her body language betraying a sense of unease as she sensed something ominous on the horizon. The game was far from over, and Victoria was preparing to play her last, most decisive card. The weight of her words settled over the audience like a thick, impenetrable fog, heightening the drama of the moment. "Will, there's something you've never shared publicly, something that could change how everyone sees you," she reiterated, her voice low and deliberate, each syllable dripping with intent. The audience leaned forward, their collective breath held, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Sandra's eyes flickered to Will, a flicker of uncertainty, dancing in her gaze as she braced herself for what might come next. Will, however, remained calm, his face a mask of unreadable composure, giving nothing away. "Are you ready to reveal the truth?" Victoria pressed, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone who believed they held a powerful trump card. Will exhaled slowly, the sound a soft release of air through his nose, then spoke with measured calm. "What truth are you talking about, Victoria?" His question was calm but pointed, a strategic move that shifted the power back into his hands, forcing her to reveal her next move. Victoria hesitated, her confidence wavering for just a fraction of a second, as she glanced down at her cards, as if reconsidering her strategy. "For years, people have admired your charisma, your infectious positivity, your remarkable ability to light up any room with your presence," she began, her words carefully chosen. "But some have wondered how much of Will Smith is truly real. How much is a meticulously crafted persona, the fresh prince who never falters, never shows a crack, never reveals weakness or vulnerability?" A murmur rippled through the crowd, a soft undercurrent of surprise and intrigue. It wasn't the explosive bombshell they had been bracing for, but it was a calculated strike aimed directly at the heart of Will's carefully maintained public identity. Sandra narrowed her eyes, her intuition kicking in as she saw through Victoria's game. This wasn't about exposing a scandal or a hidden secret. It was about dismantling the very essence of who Will was in the eyes of the world. Will tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable, then did something entirely unexpected. He smiled. It wasn't a forced smile or a nervous one, but a genuine quiet, almost amused smile that caught everyone off guard. "I see," he said simply. Victoria arched an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "So what's your answer, Will?" He leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed yet commanding. "If I were playing a character, Victoria, I'd be utterly exhausted by now, don't you think? The truth is, I'm just a man who makes mistakes, who wrestles with doubts, who feels anger, sadness, and frustration, just like anyone else in this room. The difference lies in this: I don't feel compelled to broadcast every one of those moments to prove I'm human." The audience absorbed his words, the sincerity and vulnerability in his voice resonating deeply with them. Sandra felt a surge of pride swell in her chest, a mix of admiration and respect for her friend's authenticity. Will turned slightly toward the audience, his gaze sweeping over them. "I'm not immune to the trials of life, Victoria. No one is, but I choose what parts of myself I share with the world. Not because I'm hiding anything, but because some experiences, some emotions, don't need to be public to hold meaning or truth." The applause was immediate, a powerful wave of respect and appreciation washing over the studio, the sound echoing off the walls. Victoria tapped her cue cards against the desk, her lips pressing into a thin, frustrated line. She had lost this round, and the realization was written across her face. Sandra, sensing an opportunity to shift the dynamic, leaned forward with purpose. "Let me ask you something, Victoria," she said, her tone steady and assertive. The host blinked, clearly unprepared for the reversal, her usual control slipping. "You've built an entire career on pushing people to bare their souls, on creating tension and drama at every turn. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself why you thrive on that?" The audience let out a collective gasp. The shock of seeing Victoria Lang, the master interrogator, turned into the subject of scrutiny rippling through the room. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but no words emerged, her confidence faltering under Sandra's gaze. Will, still calm and collected, decided to drive the final point home. "People don't remember us for the roles we play on the silver screen, Victoria," he said, his voice carrying a gentle wisdom. "They remember us for the role we play in their lives, how we make them feel, the emotions we inspire." The applause that followed was deafening, a thunderous ovation that signaled Victoria's defeat in this verbal duel. She exhaled sharply, her fingers tightening around her cue cards as she grappled with the realization that she had been outplayed. Regaining some semblance of composure, she turned to the cameras, her professional mask slipping back into place. Will Smith, Sandra Bullock, two legends who are still standing tall, still inspiring millions, and, as we've witnessed tonight, full of unexpected surprises that defy expectation. The audience rose to their feet, delivering a standing ovation as the segment drew to a close. Off camera, in the quiet aftermath, Victoria turned to Will and Sandra, a hint of respect flickering in her eyes where there had once been only challenge. "I didn't expect you two to handle this with such grace and strength," she admitted softly, her voice tinged with a reluctant admiration. Sandra smirked, a playful glint in her eye. "Neither did you, apparently." Victoria let out a breath, a sound that was almost a laugh, a rare crack in her armor. "Touché," she conceded. Will stood, offering his hand in a gesture of goodwill. Victoria hesitated for only a moment before shaking it, and he smiled warmly. "No expectations," he said simply. Will and Sandra left the stage together, retreating to the relative calm of the dressing room to unwind from the intensity of the encounter. Sandra kicked off her heels with a sigh of relief, the sound a soft punctuation to the evening's drama. "Well, that was something," she said, her voice laced with a mix of exhaustion and amusement. Will chuckled, the sound lightening the mood. "You okay?" he asked, his concern genuine. She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "You?" he exhaled slowly, the tension easing from his shoulders. "Yeah." Sandra broke the comfortable silence that followed. "I meant what I said out there about us being family, about the bond we share." Will nodded, his expression softening. "I know." She smiled, a wistful note in her voice. "It's weird, isn't it? We've known each other forever, shared so many moments, but we've never really worked together much after Spee." Will shrugged, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "Timing's a funny thing, isn't it? It has a way of working itself out." Sandra laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "Or maybe you were avoiding me all these years." He smirked, playing along. "Nah, you were the one avoiding me." She grinned, shaking her head in mock disbelief. "You know, back then, during those early days, I had a little crush on you, she confessed, her tone playful yet sincere. Will blinked, surprise flashing across his features. For real? She nodded, her grin widening. Yeah, but you never made a move. He tilted his head considering her words. Did you want me to? She thought for a moment, then smiled warmly. Nah, we're better like this, something deeper, more meaningful than a fleeting romance. Will nodded in agreement. Yeah, we are. A comfortable silence settled between them, a shared understanding filling the space. Sandra sighed, her thoughts drifting. Thanks for being there today, for having my back out there, she said, her voice soft with gratitude. Will met her gaze, his eyes warm and steady. Always, he replied simply. She hesitated, a deeper question forming. You get it, don't you? The weight of loss, the journey through grief, the challenge of moving forward? He nodded slowly, his expression reflecting a shared experience. Yeah, I do, he said quietly. She squeezed his hand briefly, a silent thank you passing between them. Thanks, she murmured. Sandra sat up suddenly, a spark of mischief in her eyes as she shifted gears. Okay, enough of this heavy stuff. Let's do something wild, something to shake things up. Will raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Like what? She tapped her chin thoughtfully, then grinned. Let's open a bar, call it Speed Stop. Drinks served with timers. A little stress to keep it fun. What do you think? Will laughed, the sound rich and full. That's a terrible idea, he said, shaking his head. She grinned wider. Exactly why we gotta do it, because it's crazy enough to work. They stood, linking arms as they prepared to head out, their laughter echoing. Burgers first, though, she declared. Will smirked, falling into step beside her. Burgers it is. He continued, his voice steady. Relevance isn't about clinging to the spotlight or chasing every new trend. It's about the impact you leave behind, the mark you make on people's lives. Sandra nodded in agreement, her voice softer but no less resolute. Hollywood is obsessed with what's new, what's trending, but audiences don't care about that. They crave connection, stories that resonate, and that kind of connection doesn't come with an expiration date. Victoria studied them closely, her sharp gaze assessing their unshaken demeanor. She realized with a growing sense of defeat that they weren't rattled by her question at all. So, you don't fear being forgotten? She asked, her tone probing for any crack in their armor. Will smiled faintly, a trace of wisdom in his eyes. Everyone's forgotten eventually, Victoria. That's just the natural cycle of life, he said philosophically. Sandra added, her voice gentle but firm. But if we've told stories that touched someone's heart, if we've made people feel something real and lasting, then we were never irrelevant to begin with, not to those who matter. The audience roared with applause, the sound a powerful affirmation of their words. Victoria set down her cue cards, her movements slow and deliberate, a visible shift in her demeanor as she was visibly moved by their responses. She turned to the cameras for the final line of the segment. Will Smith, Sandra Bullock, perhaps Hollywood moves on to the next big thing. But some legacies, some connections, never fade from the hearts of those they touch. In the quiet of the dressing room, Sandra broke the lingering silence, her voice cutting through the stillness. That was intense, wasn't it? Will smirked, a hint of humor in his eyes. Yeah, it was. You good? He asked, his concern genuine and warm. She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. You? He exhaled slowly, the tension draining from his frame. I am. She paused, her thoughts turning inward. Do you ever think about it, legacy? The mark we leave behind when all is said and done? Will was quiet for a moment, then nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes, he admitted. Sandra sighed, a reflective note in her voice. Is it enough, what we've done? He smiled softly, his gaze meeting hers with reassurance. More than enough, he said confidently. She studied him, curiosity piquing. How do you know? Will's gaze softened, a depth of understanding in his eyes. Because people don't remember the details of what you did. They remember how you made them feel, the emotions you stirred. Sandra nodded, absorbing his words, then smirked playfully. So what's next for us? He chuckled, the sound light and easy. Dinner? She laughed, shaking her head. I meant in life, you goof. Will shrugged, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. More stories, more moments to share. The rest doesn't matter as much as that. They stood linking arms as they walked into the night. No spotlight needed to guide their path.